Welcome to Nonprofit Insider. My name is David Unger, and I'm pleased to be hosting a show with executive directors and key people of local nonprofits. I've worked in the nonprofit world for over 30 years. In those years, I've realized that the majority of the community does not know about the organizations that provide critical services we sometimes take for granted. Most times they only hear about these important groups when you get a letter in the mail asking for money. This is a chance to hear about organizations that touch so many in our community. The opinions expressed on Nonprofit Insider are not necessarily those of WMPG, its staff and underwriters, or of USM. Today we have a really special guest, Susan Greenwood. Susan is the Executive Director of the Cromwell Center for Disability Awareness. Hi, Susan.
Hey, David. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Good. So, my first question, what is the Cromwell Center?
The Cromwell Center was founded about 10 years ago now, and it's really, we're trying to build better, safer schools and communities for people with disabilities. And we primarily do that through our free school disabilities awareness and sensitivity programs. We go into elementary schools free of charge, mostly in southern and central Maine, and work with kids in classroom settings, so smaller groups, 20 kids. We're not doing one school at a time or an assembly at a time. We're working within the classrooms and doing a bunch of fun, interactive, lively activities to help kids understand that people with disabilities are really the same as everyone else, and to become more aware of the range of disabilities and better equipped to deal more kindly and empathetically to particularly their peers with disabilities, but anyone in the community.
So if I understand this correctly, you're trainers, that's what you call them?
We call them program leaders.
Program leaders. You're showing my age here. The program leaders go in and work with small classroom settings.
Yes.
There's set curriculums that you have.
Mm-hmm.
They're very interactive, hands-on, so it's not a classroom lecture.
Right, definitely not a lecture setting.
And what's the ultimate goal at the end of the day?
The ultimate goal is to help kids, again, understand that we all have strengths to draw on, we all have challenges to overcome, and that people with disabilities, whether it's something very mild, like mild ADHD, or something more severe, like a mobility impairment or blindness or deafness, everybody deserves to be treated with kindness and empathy and acceptance.
So there's a good possibility, the way the school systems are structured with mainstreaming and everything else, that there's a child with a disability in the classroom while this is going on.
Oh, there's almost always a child with a diagnosed condition or disability in the classroom.
How does that play out?
Well, that child isn't necessarily immune from treating others unkindly. I mean, again, we all have different challenges to deal with.
Right.
So as adults, we may understand that a kid with ADHD has a disability. That child doesn't necessarily see themselves that way. So it's not like, somebody with a disability is always the one on the receiving end, of unkindness or bullying. I mean, it's all very fluid. So we don't ask kids to disclose. We don't push anyone to say what their issues may be. We know that there are kids with disabilities because there are in every classroom, but they're also just kids like everybody else.
Right. In most cases, do these issues come up just in the conversation itself?
They often do, which can be a little bit surprising because we are not pushing for disclosure. We are not coming into a classroom and expecting, 9 and 10-year-olds to share their private information with their classmates and with one of us, from the Cromwell Center. But it's surprising how more often than not, usually toward the end of a session, somebody in the classroom will choose to disclose an issue that they are dealing with, often within an activity that we're doing where we're talking about disabilities or talking, about people in their lives with disabilities. So we don't ask for disclosure, but it happens a lot.
Right. For full disclosure, I was one of the original, when I said I showed my age, I was one of the original trainers, not a program leader, but as a trainer at the time when the Cromwell first opened up. And one of the most unique experiences I had as a trainer, I'm still going to call myself a trainer, was that there was a child in a wheelchair and was very quiet during the entire discussion. And basically at the end of the day said to the class, now you know how I feel.
Absolutely. And we've heard variations of that same story from many kids. Sometimes kids have said that in a very sort of matter-of-fact way. Other times it's come with quite a bit of emotion, where somebody will sort of, be holding it together throughout the presentation. And you know what? And maybe it's, a child that the classmates don't know is struggling with some particular issue. But we've had it come out sort of tearfully. We've had it come out sort of angrily, in a frustrated voice. But that same message of, this is what it feels like. I mean, one little boy said to us, I am that kid we're talking about who gets left out. And it's really horrible.
And sometimes watching the other children's faces when that comes up puts it right into perspective.
Right.
So we're going to come back to talk specifics about Cromwell, but as a nonprofit executive director, except for fundraising, what do you think some of the biggest issues you face on a day-to-day basis are?
I think for our organization, public awareness, it's hard for us. I mean, the schools know us. The schools that we return to year after year welcome us. We're a free program. We definitely support.
When you talk about free, what do you mean?
We don't charge, when we go into the schools and do this work with the kids, we don't charge the schools anything. And so over the years, I know you were with the Cromwell Center 10 years ago or so when it started, over the years, there have been schools that really now depend on us as kind of a cornerstone of their anti-bullying movements, or their efforts within the school. So we're well known within the school communities. We're not very well known in the general community. I think we tend to be a little bit invisible because the work we're doing, we're not providing a direct service, providing wheelchairs, to people with mobility impairments or, clinical research or any of the things that may get a little bit more publicity. So for us, I'd say it's public awareness and how that does tie into fundraising, because although you said other than fundraising, I think you already know that the answer is probably the biggest challenge is having to start over every year with raising the money again.
Right, because if you don't raise the money, you can't go into the schools.
Absolutely. We're a small organization, and the dollars that we raise are directly funding the programs that we do.
I mean, for those of you who really aren't familiar with Cromwell, they do an incredible amount of work with just 2 full-time employees, and everybody else are part-time people who are going into the school and the program leaders, et cetera, et cetera. So what do you think you need to do to raise community awareness besides coming on Nonprofit Insider?
Well, we're always working on that and trying to think of ways we can do that. I don't know that we have any magic answers, but, try to get publicity when we can about our programs. We had the Falmouth Forecaster came in and covered when we did a program in one of the Falmouth elementary schools recently, and ran an article about that. That's the kind of stuff we're always working on. Interestingly, where we tend to have the most success getting publicity is when we do fundraising events.
Right.
We do a big dinner and auction every year, and we give an award to, a deserving person or corporation or community group, and that event tends to get more publicity, interestingly enough, than the actual programs do. Right.
And your event's coming up shortly, isn't it?
It's on May 29th.
And who's going to be honored this year?
This year we're giving 2 different awards. The first one is to a father-son team called Dick and Rick Hoyt. They run the Boston Marathon every year, and this last year was supposed to be their final running of that. They ended up deciding to do it again this year because of the marathon bombings.
And I did see them.
And you did?
I
That's
did
great.
see them.
Dick is a 74-year-old former Marine. His son, Rick, is now, I'd say, in his early 50s. He's severely impaired and has been from birth because of cerebral palsy. So his dad pushes him along the marathon route, and they've become very beloved and sort of a symbol to many people of the marathon. There's been a statue erected at the start line for them. So we're giving our mission award to them, and we're also going to be recognizing TD Bank for all the support that they've given financially to the Cromwell Center over the years.
They've been basically involved from the get-go.
From the very beginning, and they're our largest and most consistent corporate funder or funder of any type.
And I'm assuming if a corporation still wants to get involved, there's still an opportunity?
Absolutely. We are actively looking for sponsors for the event, and a sponsor means purchasing a table, bringing people to the event, getting to take part in the dinner and the auction, to meet the Hoyts, and we also provide some publicity opportunities with every sponsorship.
And I was at the dinner last year, and you had both senators speak? Or both senators were there?
Susan Collins was the honoree.
Okay.
She had helped the Cromwell Center enormously in the early years to obtain some federal funding that we were able to get for a few years. So we were recognizing her for that, as well as for other work she's done to support people with disabilities. Right. And Angus King was there as well as a guest.
Well, you had over 300 people, if I remember correctly. That's a great number. It was a
very successful event.
Yeah.
And it's what's funding our programs, or a lot of what's funding our programs this year comes directly from that event.
Right. It's amazing how many nonprofits in this state, at least that I've found, are operating on such shoestring budgets and go year to year, not knowing where the funds are coming from.
That's absolutely true, and that's true for us. We have a budget of about $200,000 a year.
You do all this on $200,000? And how many kids or children or students do you touch a year?
We reach about 5,000 children a year.
Wow.
In groups of 20.
Wow.
So about 250 classrooms.
That's incredible. Just the logistics needs 3 full-time people just to manage
well,
that.
Well, there's a lot of logistics with scheduling the programs and working with the schools to fit them in. But, it works. They want us there and we want to be there. So, it comes together in the end.
So... What would you like to share, or what information do you think is important for someone to understand about a nonprofit your size to help them understand what you go through on a day-to-day basis?
I guess, for people to realize that there are hundreds and hundreds of nonprofits, in the Portland area alone that are meeting needs that often people don't think about if they're not directly affected by it. And yet, at some point in their lives, in our lives, almost everyone is going to be served in some way by a nonprofit.
Whether it's social services, music, arts.
Exactly. Right. So I think people don't realize the number of nonprofits that are out there, the number that are operating, like, as you said, real shoestring budgets. But they're out there meeting needs that when people have those needs, they're glad those nonprofits are there to help.
Right. So if you would close your doors tomorrow, what impact would that have on the state?
The people who would be upset first and most would be guidance counselors and classroom teachers, because they know the value of these programs and they know that it's important, and they see the kids who are in their classrooms who are not being treated well by their classmates because they can't keep up, or they act different, or they look different, or they talk weird, as the kids say, or their behavior may be annoying, is the word a lot of 3rd and 4th graders use. He's so annoying, and they may not, they don't know that child's doing the best they can do, and they may have impulse control issues because of ADHD. There could be all kinds of things that a child is dealing with learning disabilities, emotional issues, physical challenges, and many of these teachers of the classrooms that we go back to year after year really do rely on us as one of the building blocks in this awareness and anti-bullying movement.
So it's more than just teaching about disabilities. It's the broader scope of anti-bullying that you're dealing with also.
It's less teaching about specific disabilities. We start, and much more about how we all have something to offer and we all deserve to be treated kindly.
All right. So we've started this trivia series, and I warned you there was going to be a trivia question, and I'm going to ask you the question, and then we're going to take a small break, and then you're going to give me your answer.
That sounds great.
How many adults who live with developmental disabilities live in Maine? All right. This is Nonprofit Insider with David Unger on WMPG. And today I'm talking to Susan Greenwood, Executive Director of the Cromwell Center for Disability Awareness.
Are you ready for my answer?
Sure.
I have no idea, but I'm going to guess that out of, 1.2 million people in Maine, I'm going to say 50,000.
The Maine Developmental Disabilities Council estimates about 20,000 adults.
So I went over just because I was afraid I would go under.
Right.
And you're talking just adults?
Just adults.
Okay. And I was thinking people in general, because I think about the schools and the kids. And I know that the majority of kids, or many of the kids who are identified as having special needs in the schools, have developmental disabilities.
Right. The classifications are all over the
Right.
place. So What are some of the frustrations that you have as a nonprofit executive?
I mean, the biggest frustration, and it's not glamorous, and we keep coming back to it, but is having to start each year over, not knowing where the money's going to come from. We're small, we don't have an endowment, and most nonprofits don't, especially the small ones.
But we had this big thing last week that every nonprofit should start an endowment no matter what size.
Right, and we don't. And we
but
do
that's
need
my
to
words
look
of
at that.
advice to you
Thank
today.
So no matter how good a year is, I mean, last year we had an enormously successful fundraising event. Thank goodness.
Right.
But there's no guarantee that this year's event will draw as many people. And each year we apply for grants to a number of local foundations and companies who have been very supportive, but there's no guarantee that they're going to be able to support us again the next year. And in fact, some of them have regulations or rules that if you've received funding, you can't even apply again for another year. So for me, by far the biggest frustration or concern is the fact that you do have to, the fiscal year closes, and no matter how good it was, there's a new budget, and we need to go again.
It's tough. I mean, you're always banging on doors.
Right.
Do you get a lot of individual gifts?
Not as many as we get foundation grants and corporate sponsorships. But, you know, we certainly get some. Our board members all do an appeal each year, and we have a list that we mail to. But more of our money comes from the fundraising event, the one that we do each year, and grants.
Now, did I hear correctly that you have 3 different curriculum?
When we go into a school, our ideal, it doesn't always play out this way, but what we hope to do is see a class of third graders, and we have our first year curriculum because we start with third grade, so it's our third grade curriculum. We like to go back to the same school the next year, see those same kids, but now they're fourth graders, and we have a second, a little bit more sophisticated curriculum. The third year, we see them when they're fifth graders. That's a little bit longer and definitely a little bit higher level. So that's the ideal way for us to operate, is to see those same kids from grade to grade as they grow from third graders to fifth graders who are almost going into middle school. But our curricula are set up so that if we haven't been to a school before and they want us to meet with the fourth graders, it still works.
Right. If you had to pick one highlight of the program, what would it be?
Boy, I would say that's different for each of the 3 programs that we do.
I understand. You
There's
got to pick one.
The one, interestingly to me, because I wouldn't necessarily pick this out, but the kids really are fascinated by, is a new activity that we've added this year. We did a modification and updating to our fourth grade curriculum, and we have a series of laminated, nice, 8x10 headshots that are of celebrities, and they're very spiffy looking and fancy looking, and they're people that kids would know, and there are 6 photographs, and we ask the kids divide them into groups and say, we want you to sit in these groups of 4 or 5 of you and decide as a group, which of these people do you think has disabilities? Now, of course, they all do. Some are more obvious than others. There's a young actress who is on the TV show Glee who has Down syndrome. Most of the kids recognize her or recognize by looking at her that she has Down syndrome. Some don't. But then there are others like Beyonce, the singer, who has anxiety issues, and Justin Timberlake, who has OCD. So the kids it's really cute to watch. They're just floored that these sort of good-looking, very successful celebrities. One of them is a professional football player who's deaf. He's the first offensive player who's deaf. He's on there, and he looks very strong and sporty. And so they're just blown away that these people that they perceive, rightfully so, as being highly successful and famous, which kids love, all have something that they're struggling with. So when we added that, we thought it seemed cool and that the kids would be interested in it, but sort of underestimated how fascinated they are to learn that.
So OCD and anxiety issues are classified as disabilities?
Well, there's no one accepted definition of disability that everyone agrees on, and I've kind of wrestled with that too. Does that really qualify? So it's sort of a judgment call, but, we try to use as broad a definition of disability as is appropriate and accurate, which means anything that causes people, to need to use some modifications or to struggle with something that's, biologically based, physically based,
Right.
or, emotionally based. So it's a broad definition.
And how many different program leaders do you have?
We have 5 people right now that are delivering the programs. All of them are former teachers who, for one reason or another, aren't teaching right now. One retired after 38 years of teaching in the Mid-Coast area. Another is staying home with kids, and another is doing a different job, part-time job in a school. So they're all people that have been elementary school teachers, but for whatever reason are not working full-time in that job right now.
And so you go through a full training program with them?
Yes. Yeah.
And what kind of evaluation system do you have with the schools?
For every program that we do, each classroom we go into, we ask the teacher or teachers, or sometimes there could be a guidance counselor in the room as well, to fill out an evaluation form. And we're asking them to rate us on 1 through 5 on 6 or 7 different items. Does this program support and supplement your own anti-bullying efforts? Was it appropriate and engaging to the kids? And so we get the teacher's assessment. And then we also ask, how effective was this particular program leader? And then leave space for some comments and ask them for suggestions. Is there something we could change? Is there something you'd like to add or you'd like to see us add to the programs?
So I'd like you to forget we're on radio.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like you to forget that this radio show is going to be posted all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And tell me from your heart why I should give to the Cromwell Center.
Because the work we're doing in the schools is not being done by anyone else. The schools are struggling to just meet their core curriculum requirements. Right. And it's critical. Every one of us can relate to, on some level, what it feels like to be the person who's left out or who's treated unkindly. Not everyone can relate to that because of a disability or an issue that they can't help, but on some human level, we all understand what that feels like, and everyone has painful memories of childhood. And to be the kid who is left out because they can't keep up, that they're not quick enough, with their learning, or their behavior doesn't fit in perfectly with what's cool in that 4th grade classroom because of an issue they can't help. It's enormously painful for kids. And it has a lifelong effect on kids who are bullied, and kids who are bullied because of disabilities.
So your work is, if we put it into change vocabulary, you're really working to make a systematic change within the school districts.
Well, within a generation, I would say.
That's even better.
It translates, yes, we're meeting with the kids in the school, but we don't, the work that we're doing, the activities that we're doing with the kids are not set up to only be about school. They are about treating people kindly in all parts of your
Right.
life, and to recognize that you will meet people with disabilities, and you have people with disabilities in your own family. Well, even if it's a grandparent,
Right.
who uses a wheelchair, because they had a hip replacement. So we're taking it. It might happen in the classrooms, but we're taking it outside of the classrooms and with what we're hoping kids will take away.
Oh, that's great. And if someone wanted to contact you, how would they do that?
They would give us a call at our office in Portland. It's 207-775-9955. They can look for us on Facebook under the Cromwell Center. They can look at our website, which is cromwellcenter.org, or they can email us at info@cromwellcenter.org.
I'm going to do my shtick, and then I want to come back with one last question that I
Okay.
kept forgetting to ask.
Okay.
Next week, we're going to have Michelle Servidal, Executive Director of the York County Community Services. The music appears by courtesy of Mike Hubbard. You could see Mike's information on www.michaelhubbardmusic.com. Check out Mike's website to see where he's playing this weekend. And thanks to Deb Danger, NPI's Executive Engineer. If you know of a nonprofit that should be on the show, please email me at npi.davidunger.net. Quickly, who's Jeremiah Cromwell?
Jeremiah Cromwell was a young boy who died at age 14 and is buried in a graveyard at what's now called Pineland, but at the time was the main school for the feeble-minded, and it is where people with developmental and other disabilities were essentially warehoused back in the 1920s, 30s, and beyond. And when the Cromwell Center's founders were trying to decide on a name for the organization, knowing that the mission was to be around building better communities for people with disabilities, they walked through that graveyard at Pineland and chose a name to sort of represent the struggles that people with disabilities have faced. This young boy was warehoused at that institution, and he died there of appendicitis when he was 14 years old, and he was buried on the Pineland campus because there were no family members who claimed him.
And you have that grave marker in your office.
And we have the original grave marker, which was simply stamped with his patient ID number.
It's quite a reminder of where we've come from.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Susan.
Thank you, David.
I hope you had a good experience here, and I look forward to talking with everybody next week.
Thanks.